The waves were calm that morning, the sky clear as glass. It was supposed to be a routine training, swim nothing out of the ordinary for 17-year-old Olympic hopeful Emily Hart. She had swum that route dozens of times before, always under her father's watchful eye from his boat. But on that day, something changed. One moment she was cutting through the water like she was born for it, and the next she was gone. No splash, no call for help, just silence. Her swim cap floated near. The buoy and her goggles were found caught in the rope. The Coast Guard searched for weeks. Divers combed every inch of the area. But Emily had vanished without a trace. Her disappearance stunned the nation. Headlines read, "Young Olympic swimmer missing at sea," and asterisk, "vanishing in open water." But no answers came, just grief and silence. Her family never gave up hope, especially her father, who returned to that same spot every month for 4 long years. He said he could feel her there somewhere. Then, one foggy morning, he spotted something unusual hanging from the very buoy where she was last seen. It wasn't debris. It was something personal, something that hadn't been there before. As he pulled it off the buoy with shaking hands, a chill ran down his spine. What he found didn't just reopen old wounds, it raised new questions. Where had Emily really gone that day? And how could something like this suddenly appear after all this time? The object tied to the buoy was Emily's necklace, silver, with a tiny dolphin charm her father had given her when she was 8. It was the one she wore every single day, including the morning she disappeared. Her dad, Rick, held it tightly in his hand, heart racing. It was clean, untarnished, like it had just been placed there. But by who? And why now, 4 years later? Rick reported the discovery immediately, but authorities didn't treat it as urgent. They said it could have drifted in the water, caught by chance. But he knew better. That buoy had been checked dozens of times. He'd checked it himself. Something about how the necklace was wrapped, carefully tied in a sailor's knot, positioned where only someone familiar with that route would notice, made him feel certain it was a message. Emily had been a rising star in the swimming world. Her coach had called her a once-in-a-generation talent. She trained hard, often in open water, to build endurance. That morning had been like any other. She dove in, aiming for the outer marker. Rick was right behind in the boat, tracking her movements. But somewhere between the second and third buoy, she vanished. There were rumors, of course. Some believed she'd been pulled under by a current. Others whispered about a private boat seen nearby that day. But nothing had ever been proven. And now, with her necklace back in Rick's hands, the silence of the past 4 years was suddenly broken. Only this time, the questions were louder than ever. Rick couldn't shake the feeling that someone wanted him to find the necklace. He replayed the day Emily vanished over and over in his mind, wondering if he missed something. The tide had been low, visibility, good conditions. She trained in all the time. But what he kept circling back to was the boat. A white speedboat had passed by just minutes before she went under. At the time, he didn't think much of it. Now, it felt like more than just coincidence. He reached out to the harbor patrol, hoping they still had logs from that day. Most of the records had been archived. But one officer remembered something odd, a report from a local fisherman who had seen the same boat near a restricted area, closer to the cliffs. The report had never been followed up. Meanwhile, Emily's old coach, Denise, heard about the necklace and reached out to Rick. She confessed that before the disappearance, Emily had confided in her about someone watching her during training. At the time, Denise thought it was just nerves. Emily had recently gained a lot of attention after qualifying for the Olympic trials. Fans, media, even a few overeager scouts had started showing up at her practices. Rick's heart sank. What if this wasn't an accident? What if someone had planned it? The necklace felt less like closure and more like a signal, like someone was ready to talk or ready to warn. And Rick knew, for the first time in 4 years, the real story was just beginning. Rick's mind was spinning. The necklace, the coach's confession, the boat hit was all too connected to ignore. He returned to the harbor with a copy of the fisherman's old report in hand, determined to find the man who filed it. After asking around for hours, he finally tracked him down, an older man named Leo, who remembered the day clearly. He recalled seeing the white boat circle the same buoy Emily was headed toward, staying unusually still before speeding off in the opposite direction. It had no markings, no flags, just silence and speed. With fresh urgency, Rick revisited old security footage from a nearby marina. Most of it was blurry, but one grainy clip stood out. The same white boat docked for a brief moment that morning, just enough time for someone to load or unload something. The image was shaky, but one detail stood out. A man in a red jacket, face partially hidden, pacing near the boat with what looked like a black duffel bag. Rick shared everything with the local authorities. But again, they seemed hesitant to reopen. The case, it's been for years, they said. No real evidence. Frustrated but more determined than ever, Rick decided to take matters into his own hands. That night, unable to sleep, he returned to the buoy where he'd found the necklace. The tide was high, the moonlight sharp on the water. As he approached, something else caught his eye just under the surface, wedged in the buoy's anchor rope. It looked like fabric, and it wasn't there before. Rick leaned over the edge of his boat, heart pounding as he reached into the water. The fabric was tangled deep in the anchor rope, soaked and heavy. He pulled slowly, careful not to tear it. When he finally lifted it out, his breath caught. It was part of a wetsuit, torn at the shoulder, with faint initials embroidered near the collar. E.H. It was Emily's. There was no doubt now someone had been back here. And recently, the wetsuit was still damp and hadn't yet faded from the salt. He sat there, stunned, turning the fabric over in his hands when a faint sound interrupted his thoughts. A second boat engine, distant but getting closer. Rick looked up, scanning the dark water. A small vessel with no running lights was heading in his direction, moving slowly but deliberately. It wasn't a fishing boat, and it didn't belong to any local patrol. He quickly killed his engine and lights, drifting silently. The strange boat circled the buoy once, just as Rick had done. Then, without stopping, it turned and sped off into the fog, disappearing as fast as it came. Rick's instincts told him he wasn't alone and looking for Emily anymore. Someone was watching the buoy, just like he had been. But were they trying to help or cover something up? The discovery of the wetsuit had escalated everything. It meant Emily had been alive, long enough to remove it, or someone had kept it for a reason. And now, someone else knew Rick was getting closer to the truth. Rick returned home that night, soaked and shaken, clutching Emily's torn wetsuit like a lifeline. He didn't sleep. Instead, he spread out every clue on the dining table: photos, maps, the necklace, the report, and now the wetsuit. There had to be something he was missing. That's when he noticed it stitched into the wetsuit's inner lining was a tiny tag, something he'd overlooked before. It had coordinates, barely legible, but just enough to trace. At dawn, he followed. The numbers out past the usual swimming area, beyond the rocky cove where few boats ever ventured. And there, hidden behind an outcrop, he found it a small floating dock, weather-worn but still anchored. Tied beneath it, half submerged in a crate, was a waterproof container. Inside was a journal. Emily's handwriting filled every page. She had survived. The journal revealed she'd been pulled from the water by a man on the white boat, ex-swimmer turned recluse, who had once trained under the same coach. He believed he was protecting her from what he called a corrupt system after overhearing threats made toward Emily's rising career. Afraid and isolated, she stayed hidden, unsure who to trust. Eventually, she tried to leave clues, like the necklace and the wetsuit, hoping her father would find them. But the biggest twist came at the end of the journal. The man who took her wasn't working alone. The final page ended with 7 chilling words. Asterisk, he said. My coach sent him to... Asterisk, everything Rick thought he knew shattered in that moment. Rick turned the last page of the journal with trembling hands. Emily had trusted him to find it, and now the truth was finally out. He gave everything to the authorities: her journal, the wetsuit, the coordinates. A full investigation was launched, and within weeks, the man who had kept her hidden was taken into custody. But the real shock came when they confronted Denise, Emily's coach. At first, she denied everything. But after days of questioning, she finally admitted she had known more than she ever let on. She hadn't sent the man, but she had confided in him, venting about pressure from higher-ups, sponsors, and decisions that could make or break Emily's Olympic path. He took it too far. Emily was found days later at a quiet cabin near the coast, alive but thin and guarded. She had been living off the grid, unsure whether she could come back without bringing trouble with her. When she saw her dad again, she broke down in his arms. That moment, after 4 painful years, brought real healing.